There's a moment I want you to sit with for a second. You walk into a room and you stop, because you can't remember why you came in. And you laugh. You always laugh. You say the thing everyone says. Well, that's 50 for you. Or 60. Or 70. But later, when the house is quiet, you don't laugh. Later you're lying in bed, and your feet feel strange, a little numb, a little far away, like they belong to somebody standing next to you, and you're tired in a way that sleeping doesn't fix. And a thought crosses your mind that you would never say out loud to your children. Is this how it starts? I want to tell you something, and I want to be careful about how I say it, because I'm not here to frighten you. Some of what you're calling age has a name, and for a surprising number of adults over 50, a number much larger than anyone would guess, that name is one single vitamin. One, not a shelf full of bottles, not a whole new routine. One vitamin your body used to pull out of your food without you ever thinking about it, and then, quietly, somewhere in your 50s, stopped being able to reach. Let me explain what actually happens, because nobody explains this part. When you were 30, your stomach was a very acidic place. That was on purpose. That acid was doing a job you never noticed, and the job was this. Most vitamins, your body just takes. They come in with the food, they cross over, done. No ceremony. This one doesn't work that way. This one comes into your stomach, locked to the protein in your meat, your eggs, your fish. And to get it loose, your stomach has to pour acid on it. Then a second protein has to come out and meet it, a kind of escort. And only then, all the way down at the very end of the small intestine, is there one specific door that will let that pair through. Acid, escort, door. 3 steps, every single time. It's the most complicated absorption process in human nutrition, and your body ran it perfectly, 3 times a day, for 50 years, without ever asking you for help. And then the stomach gets older. Somewhere between 10 and 30% of adults over 50 develop something called atrophic gastritis. The lining of the stomach thins. It makes less acid. It's slow. It's silent. And there is no symptom that announces it. You will not feel your stomach making less acid. You'll just feel a little more tired, a little more forgetful, a little more like the woman in the mirror is somebody's grandmother now. Which brings me to the name, vitamin B12. And I know that sounds almost disappointing. B12 is on the label of every cheap multivitamin at the drugstore. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the vitamin your neighbor talks about at the fence. So let me tell you what it actually does, and then tell me if it still sounds like nothing. Your nerves are wires, every one of them, from your spinal cord down your leg to the sole of your foot, from your fingertips back up to your brain, wires. And like any wire that carries a signal, they're wrapped in insulation. Yours is called myelin. It's a fatty sheath that keeps the signal fast and keeps it clean. B12 is what your body uses to maintain that insulation. That's not the whole job. It also helps build red blood cells, the ones carrying oxygen to every part of you. It helps copy your DNA every time a cell divides. But the insulation is the one I want you to hold on to. Because when the insulation on a wire starts to fray, the signal doesn't stop. It gets noisy. And noisy is exactly what people describe. Tingling in the hands, pins and needles in the feet, that odd, unreliable feeling in the legs when you get up at night and reach for the wall. Not pain, just a kind of vagueness. And upstairs, the same fraying, Words that used to be right there and now aren't, losing the thread in a sentence. A mood that's flat in a way that isn't sadness and isn't quite anything. Now, read that list again. Tired, forgetful, unsteady, low. That's not a list of symptoms. In our culture, that's a description of being old. And that's the whole problem. That's the entire reason we're having this conversation. Because when a 58-year-old woman tells her family her feet feel funny and she can't hold on to names anymore, nobody in that room thinks nutrient. They think time. She thinks time. And she starts, very quietly, making herself smaller, writing things down, not driving at night, not bringing it up. She adjusts. She adjusts to something that might have been correctable. I want to be honest with you about the numbers here, because I don't want to sell you anything. Researchers at Tufts, working with the Framingham data, one of the longest-running heart studies in America, found that around 40% of the people they measured had B12 sitting in what the lab calls the low normal range. Not flagged, not deficient, just low normal. And here's the part that stayed with me. Work going back to the 90s, from Lindenbaum and others, found people with real neurological symptoms, symptoms that improved when they were treated, at levels the lab had already called normal, up around 350, sometimes higher. So the test comes back, the doctor says fine, and the woman goes home with her feet still tingling and no explanation, and she believes the only story anyone gave her, that this is just what 58 feels like now. There's a name for that range. Doctors call it the gray zone, roughly 200 to 350 on the standard test. Above deficient, below comfortable, and impossible to interpret on its own. But there are two other blood tests that settle it. One is methylmalonic acid, MMA. One is homocysteine. Both are substances your body can only clear properly when B12 is actually working inside the cell, not just floating in the blood. If B12 is truly doing its job, they stay low. If it isn't, they climb, even when the first test looked fine. Write those two names down somewhere. MMA, homocysteine. Not because you're going to diagnose yourself. You're not, and I'll come back to that. But because a specific question changes a conversation, and a vague one doesn't. Now let me tell you about the second group. And this one catches good people who are doing everything right. Your medicine cabinet. If you take metformin for diabetes, and millions of us do, metformin interferes with how you take up B12. That's been known for decades. It's in the prescribing information. If you take something for reflux or heartburn, omeprazole, pantoprazole, any of that family, those drugs work by shutting down stomach acid. That's the entire point of them, and they work. But go back to step one of the three. Acid is what unlocks B12 from your food. Turn down the acid, and you turn down the unlocking. And a 2025 study out of Korea looked at people taking both, the diabetes drug and the acid blocker together, and found the risk of B12 deficiency significantly higher than with the diabetes drug alone. Both together, which describes an enormous number of people over 50. I want to be very clear, because this matters. Nobody is telling you to stop your medication. Those drugs are doing something for you that you need. This is not a video about quitting anything. It's a video about knowing what your prescriptions are quietly costing you, so you can put it back. There's one more piece, and then I'll tell you the part that's actually good news. For a long time, The classic sign of B12 deficiency was anemia. Big, pale, abnormal red blood cells. That was the flag on the routine blood work. But since the late 90s, flour and cereal in this country have been fortified with folic acid. For good reasons. It prevented real birth defects. And folic acid does something specific. It can correct that anemia. It can make the red blood cells look normal again. It just can't repair the nerve. So the flag comes down while the fraying continues, and the person feels fine on paper, right up until the point where they don't. All right, here's the good news, and it's genuinely good. Remember the 3 steps: acid, escort, door. That's how your body handles B12 that's bound up in food. Synthetic B12, the kind in a fortified cereal or a supplement, isn't bound up in anything. It arrives loose. And loose B12 doesn't need most of that ceremony. There's a second, simpler route into your bloodstream, plain diffusion, that doesn't care whether your stomach still makes acid. Meaning, the very same person who can no longer get B12 out of a steak can usually get it out of a tablet without any trouble at all. This isn't a fringe idea. The Institute of Medicine, the body that sets nutrient recommendations in the United States, put it directly into the official guidance. Adults over 50 should get most of their B12 from fortified foods or supplements. That recommendation was published in 1998. 1998. It has been sitting there in the official record for more than 25 years, and I would guess most of the people watching this have never once been told. And if you're still here with me at this point in the video, I want to ask you something. Subscribe to the channel. Come sit with us. We do this a few times a week. The things nobody sat you down and explained, told straight, without a sales pitch at the end. And honestly, the reason I make these is that most of what's said to people our age gets said about us in the third person, in a waiting room, and I got tired of it. So let me get back to it, because there's one more thing about this vitamin that I don't think you've heard, and it's the part that made me want to make this video in the first place. Oxford. A study called VitaCog. They took 271 people over the age of 70 who already had mild cognitive impairment, memory problems, measurable, real, some of the ones we're most afraid of. Half of them got B12, B6, and folate. Half of them got a placebo. 2 years. Nobody knew which group they were in. Brain scans at the start, brain scans at the end. The brain shrinks with age. That's normal. It's expected. In the group taking the B vitamins, it shrank more slowly. And now the part I keep turning over. The benefit wasn't spread evenly. It went almost entirely to the people who walked in with high homocysteine, that second marker I asked you to write down. The ones whose numbers were already fine got almost nothing. So the vitamins didn't make anybody's brain better than it was meant to be. They just gave back to the people who were missing something. That's not a cure. I want to say that plainly, because there is a whole industry out there that would take that study and sell you a miracle, and I'm not going to. It's one trial. It's a specific group of people. It does not reverse dementia, and anybody who tells you otherwise is reaching into your pocket. But it does tell you something worth knowing, that some of what looks like decline is decline, and some of it is a deficit. And those two things look identical from the outside, and they are not the same thing at all. So what do you actually do? First, you ask. That's the whole first step, and it's the one people skip. Next time you're in front of your doctor, say the specific thing. I'd like my B12 checked, and if it comes back borderline, I'd like MMA or homocysteine. That sentence takes 11 seconds. It's a cheap test. And if you take metformin, or you take something for reflux, you have a concrete reason to ask that any doctor will recognize immediately. Second, understand what the number means. The official daily requirement for an adult is small, about 2.4 micrograms, almost nothing, but that number assumes a stomach that still works the way it did at 30. Supplements are dosed much higher than that, and it isn't marketing. When B12 comes in loose and takes that simpler route, only a small fraction of it actually crosses over. The dose is high because the passage is narrow. Third, don't overcomplicate the form. There's a whole argument online about methylcobalamin versus cyanocobalamin, and people get very passionate about it. For most people, it doesn't matter. Cyanocobalamin is the cheap, stable one that's been used for decades, and it works. And fourth, and I mean this, do this with your doctor, not with a video. I'm not examining you. I can't see your kidney function, and kidney function changes how those tests read. There are other things that cause tingling and forgetfulness, and some of them need attention that a vitamin will never provide. What I'm handing you is a question. The answer belongs in a room with somebody who's actually looking at you. I'll tell you what I think the real damage is here, and it isn't the vitamin. It's the resignation. It's a woman who stops driving to her sister's house after dark because her legs feel unreliable and she doesn't trust them anymore. It's a man who quits the card game on Thursdays because he can't follow the conversation like he used to, and he'd rather leave than be watched. Nobody diagnosed either of them. They diagnosed themselves, and the diagnosis was old. And then the world got smaller, one small surrender at a time, and every one of them was reasonable. That's the thing about it. Not one of those decisions looked like giving up from the inside. There is a version of this where she gets the test, where it comes back low, where 3 months later her feet stop tingling and she drives to her sister's house in the dark and doesn't even notice that she's doing it. That's not a miracle. That's a blood test and a bottle of pills that cost less than a cup of coffee. That's the whole distance between those two women. I keep thinking about that stomach. 50 years, 3 steps, 3 times a day, never once asking you for anything. And then one day it can't finish the job, and it doesn't tell you, and it doesn't complain. It just quietly stops handing you something, and you spend the next 10 years assuming the problem is you. Your body didn't stop working. It stopped being able to reach. Those are different sentences. Sit with them for a second, and you'll feel how different. I'm not going to tell you that everything you're feeling is a vitamin. It isn't. Some of it is time, and time is real, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise. You've buried people, you've watched things change, you know exactly how much of life doesn't get fixed. But some of it isn't time, and you can't tell the difference by feeling. Nobody can. The only way to know which one you're carrying is to look. The saddest thing I know is somebody spending 15 years being careful about something that had a name the whole time. So ask. Ask, and then go find out what's actually yours to carry. If any part of this landed, do 3 things for me. Follow the channel. That's how these reach you. Send this to 5 people over 50. Your sister, the friend who's been tired for 2 years and jokes about it, the one who takes metformin. You already know which 5. That's the one thing I can't do from here, and you can. And leave me a comment, a real one, not great video. Tell me if this sounded like you. Tell me if you asked and what they said. And tell me what you want me to look into next, because that's genuinely where these come from. I read them. I'll see you in the next one.